particular, we'll be doing some defining of the difference between coaching and mentoring and some of the other terms that are sometimes confused with coaching. We'll be doing some things to explore how coaching is applied in various different contexts in schools in Australia. We'll be hearing some direct experiences from Australian educators about the impact that coaching's made. And we'll be looking at some things around formal coaching and informal coaching, and we'll be giving people an opportunity to practice and try out some of the things that we'll be exploring.
Bienvenidos y buenas tardes a la Conferencia Coaching para el Liderazgo Educativo. Muchísimas gracias a todos por acompañarnos, a todos los que están aquí en esta sala y a todos los que hoy nos están acompañando desde Huesca, desde Teruel, desde Logroño y desde Guadalajara. Buenas tardes a todos y muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos. Hoy y mañana está con nosotros John Campbell. John Campbell es el director general de Grow Coach International. Muchísimas gracias por estar aquí. Welcome to Zaragoza. Él viene desde Australia, nada menos. Australia, como todos ustedes saben, pues es un país referente también en innovación educativa, quizá menos oído en España, pero no por menos oído, es uno de los países que están liderando con más fuerza la innovación educativa. De hecho, la inmensa mayoría de las escuelas en Australia ofrecen programas de coaching, alentando también este tema desde el Gobierno. Nos acompaña también hoy Andrea Giraldez, que es directora de aprendizaje online del Grow Coaching International. Muchísimas gracias, Andrea, por acompañarnos también. Y, bueno, como decíamos, John hoy impartirá la conferencia Coaching para el Liderazgo Educativo y mañana la masterclass Fundamentos del Coaching Educativo. Me gustaría destacar algo importante en la trayectoria de John Campbell, que después describiremos con más detalle, y es que él se dedica exclusivamente al coaching en educación, combinando la formación con la investigación. Como decíamos al principio de presentar el programa, hemos querido buscar y conseguir encontrar esos líderes inspiradores de esa innovación educativa y sobre todo que nos proporcionaran rigor científico en sus aportaciones, ¿no? Y en su experiencia. Creo que en este sentido John Campbell es una gran aportación para el programa Educar para el Futuro. Siempre comentamos en las presentaciones que esta edición tiene como eje central la transformación, ¿no? Liderar la innovación educativa desde la transformación. Y comentamos siempre que esa transformación hace referencia a 4 ejes principales, ¿no? Por una parte, el currículum del alumno, por otra parte, los roles, tanto del docente como del alumno, como de los padres. También es muy importante la transformación en la organización, para eso se necesita un nuevo liderazgo. Y, por último, la transformación que hace referencia a los espacios de aprendizaje. Y en esta edición, además, nos hemos querido centrar en 7 áreas. Hoy nos vamos a referir al área de liderazgo y creatividad, a la cual hemos dedicado varias conferencias y masterclass. ¿Por qué nos ha parecido importante introducir esta área en el programa Educar para el Futuro de esta edición? Pues porque en esta sociedad del cambio, en la que se juntan muchas variables, los avances científicos por un lado, las nuevas tecnologías, incluso la crisis económica, todo eso está provocando en el mundo, no solo en España, una verdadera revolución educativa que desde nuestro programa estamos apoyando. Y esa revolución educativa necesita una transformación que pasa por la innovación. Y para conseguir que esa transformación sea verdadera, sea duradera, se necesita un nuevo liderazgo que pasa por mirar hacia adentro. A veces estamos muy preocupados con buscar nuevas metodologías, que todo es importante, ¿no? Pero todo ese cambio, en primer lugar, pasa por uno mismo. En este libro, que podrán ustedes adquirir a la salida, y si quieren también se lo puede firmar John, donde se recoge todo lo que es la filosofía, ¿no?, del coaching educativo, del Grow Coaching educativo, y que está escrito por Andrea Giraldez y por Cristian, pues ambos autores son 2 profesionales directivos del Grow Coaching International. En ese libro hay una cita que me ha gustado mucho que dice, ¿no? Para cambiar el sistema, lo primero es cambiarse a uno mismo. El coaching ha demostrado ser una herramienta con mucho potencial para conseguir ese cambio, que lejos de ser impuesto, ha de ser elegido libremente. Todos los que estamos aquí tenemos experiencia que solo desde la libertad se produce el verdadero cambio, ¿no? El verdadero cambio que provoca un compromiso real, ¿no? Y se puede construir sobre terreno firme, solo desde la libertad, ¿no? En eso estamos todos convencidos. Por eso el cambio tiene que ser consecuencia de procesos que favorecen la toma de conciencia, la responsabilidad, etc. Y a todo eso es a lo que nos ayuda el coaching. Por eso creo que es un acierto el haber introducido una de las materias de este programa de este año, el coaching educativo, y más desde un experto como es John Campbell. El programa Educar para el Futuro, creo que todos lo vamos viviendo, ¿no? Todos los que estamos aquí, pues está diseñado desde el convencimiento de que otra educación es posible, ¿no? Y soñamos en ello. Voy a leerles una cita que me ha parecido muy a propósito, ¿no? Para introducir la conferencia de hoy. Es una cita de O'Connor y Legis y dice: cuando soñamos, utilizamos la imaginación, saltamos de los confines de nuestra vida a un mundo más amplio en el que todo es posible y en el que no estamos limitados a esas cartas que nos han sido repartidas. En ellos tenemos libertad para tomar cualquier otra carta y cambiar la suerte de la partida. Los sueños nos llevan más allá de nosotros mismos. Cada cambio en nuestra vida comienza con un sueño. Utilizamos la imaginación para proyectarnos hacia el mejor de los futuros. ¿Qué tiene que ver el coaching con los sueños? El coaching trata del cambio, de cómo hacer cambios. El coach es un mago del cambio que toma las cartas que tienes y te ayuda a jugarlas mejor, a cambiar las reglas del juego o a encontrar un juego mejor. Los cambios se originan en el sueño de algo mejor. Cuando ya hemos alcanzado un sueño, miramos más allá y volvemos a soñar. Siempre hay otro sueño después del sueño. Bien, en el programa creo que esta conferencia es una oportunidad extraordinaria para seguir soñando, como lo estamos haciendo a lo largo del programa Educar para el Futuro, en construir a través de la educación un mundo mejor y mucho más feliz para todos. Voy a comentarles algunos rasgos del currículum de John Campbell. Él es director ejecutivo del Grow Coaching International, organización australiana que desde hace más de una década ha venido ofreciendo formación y servicios de coaching para profesores y líderes de instituciones educativas de toda Australia y la región de Asia y el Pacífico. Y más recientemente, a través de sus filiales, Grow Coaching UK y Grow Coaching Online, ofrece programas formativos en Reino Unido, España y Latinoamérica. Campbell ha sido profesor de secundaria, consultor en la elaboración de los currículos de Australia, ha facilitado procesos de formación en coaching y liderazgo para miles de educadores en Australia y otros muchos países. En los últimos años, junto a su equipo, ha liderado numerosos proyectos de coaching en el sector educativo. Entre ellos, ha dirigido un programa a gran escala para la formación de directores y líderes educativos a través del Boston Institute of Educational Leadership en Vitoria y otros, ¿no?, en Australia. Es el organizador de la National Coaching Conference for Education, que cada año atrae a miles de delegados de Australia, la región de Asia-Pacífico y otros países. Es coorganizador del Simposio Internacional de Coaching y Psicología Positiva en Educación, conjuntamente con el Positivity Institute. Asimismo, es autor en diversas publicaciones, así como numerosos artículos. Imparte el módulo de coaching y memoria en el programa de máster para el liderazgo de la Universidad de South Wales. Además de sus titulaciones en el ámbito educativo, es máster en comunicación organizacional y psicología del coaching por la Universidad de Sydney, Australia. Muchísimas gracias, John. Y antes de dar paso a John, quería comentar algunas cuestiones prácticas, como es Recordarles que todas las conferencias que se están celebrando aquí en el Patio de la Infanta están ya colgadas en la web Aula en Red de Ibercaja. Por ejemplo, la que tuvimos recientemente de Luz Reyo ya está, ¿no?, en la plataforma online de Obra Social de Ibercaja. También recordarles que todas las sugerencias, comentarios, felicitaciones a los ponentes que quieran hacernos llegar, lo pueden hacer ustedes a través de la página web de Obra Social, a través del contacta que tienen ahí, ¿no?, en la pantalla ahora mismo. Recordarles también que todo el programa Educar para el Futuro está homologado con las condiciones que se requiere previamente, ¿no? Y sin más, muchísimas gracias, John, por acompañarnos y muchísimas gracias a todos ustedes por participar hoy en el programa. Gracias.
Hola. Thank you very much for those warm words of welcome, Anna. And it's wonderful to be with you tonight. We've had a great few days in Spain. This is only my second visit, and we've just enjoyed the time working with teachers in Barcelona and in Madrid so far, and I look forward to working with you tonight. Thank you for coming, and I hope you're going to take away some things that will be useful to you tomorrow in what you might be doing in your work. I'd just be interested to know who is in a classroom teaching at the moment. Just show of hands there. Keep your hand up if you are in the primary teaching. Okay. Now the question here, have you been teaching for 10 years or more? Would you maybe raise your hand? Congratulations. It's great that you've stayed. Yeah, if you're in a principal or a leadership role in school, would you maybe raise your hand as well? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. It's going to be interesting to see how what we do tonight plays out, and I do want to make it practical for you so that you can take away some things that will be useful to you as you think about how this coaching thing works. So, a couple of things to explore as we get started. Explore some things around what coaching is and what it isn't. In my country, there's been quite a bit of confusion about those terms. Maybe that's not the case here. We'd like to explore that a little. We want to have a look at some of the different contexts in which coaching can play out in school communities. We want to do some things talking around the difference between formal and informal coaching. We want to allow you to hear some of the experiences of some Australian teachers to see whether that might be useful to you. And we'll do a little bit of thinking about what might be a good next step for you in your context, if this is sounding useful to you. So we're going to walk through those things, and just a couple of quick points of logistics. All of these slides, if you find them useful, will be available in PDF format, so you don't need to take notes a lot if you rather not do that. And also, I'm making some references to a lot of studies. We won't go through them all, but you can look them all up if you wish. Everything I talk about here has a reference of some sort, and there's lots of them there. They're all in English, unfortunately, but you can chase these down if you wish to do that. Okay, so before we get started, just a couple of points of introduction. I'm from Australia. Anyone been there? Great, long way, but thank you for getting there. I hope we showed you a good time. It's a big place. So from Sydney to Perth, Sydney where I live to Perth is like a 5-hour flight. So that is Madrid to Athens or something like that, I think. It's a long way. And most of the population is in the southeast corner. So a big country. The education is divided amongst the states. The state systems take care of it, and about 30% of students attend independent schools, which is quite large from what I understand here and also in the UK and other places. So 75% in government schools, large independent schools, a large Catholic system, and then small faith-based Protestant Christian schools and Islamic schools make up the whole way it works. Okay, we work in all of those systems. Whoops. Here's a bit where I live. I live in Sydney. This is where I live, and I get to go there most mornings in the summer. It's a great place. If you like the look at it, come on down. We'll put something on the barbecue for you, and we'll have a good time. So that's about 20 minutes north of Sydney, and there's me in my beach towel there. That's probably enough to see, and that's where I live. And that's what I like to do. One of the things I really like to do is to spend time with my grandsons. One is 6, one is 3, Reuben and Jack, and they're just learning how to read. And to be with them doing that is just a lovely thing to do, as many of you will know with the children that you teach. So a couple of things about me, and I'm going to ask you to do the same in just a moment, to share a little bit, because I can't be here talking about coaching and just talk about it. I want to give you a chance to try a little bit as we go through. So the course of this next less than an hour, I'd like you to actually have a couple of conversations. This will be the first one. So your first challenge will be just to find a partner, somebody near you that you can have a conversation with, and just to swap some notes on what I've just shared. Your name, where you're from, something you like to do, and one thing more for you. What might be a good takeaway for you from your time here tonight? So, one other thing before we start, because there's a lot of people, and I'd rather do some things that allow us to have some conversations, we'll make a bit of noise. That's fine. You might want to stand, or for this, it'll only be 3 minutes or so, short time. You might want to stand across the aisles in a bit of space or whatever, someone in front of you, someone behind, someone beside. But as it's time to finish, I'll just raise my hand, and that'll be a signal. 3 minutes is up, or 2 minutes is up, and if you can just finish your comments and come back together, I think we might have some music start to play from the back at that time as well. So here's the first one. This is the easiest one, although the others aren't all that hard either. But can you just find a partner and just do some swapping of some of your background, brief background, some of the things you like to do, and one key takeaway from you that you'd like to walk away with tonight? Go. Okay, if you can just bring that to a conclusion. It's just 1 minute to swap on that. I hope you're able to think about a key outcome, a key takeaway, a resultado, if you like that. It will allow you to say, this has been a useful hour of your time tonight. That's a really key, important coaching principle, to start with the end in mind. What is what we would like to take away? What is the end result? And so I'd just like to encourage you to think about that. We won't share it, but just to maybe record that and have a think as we come to the end, whether that's been something you can actually recognize has happened. Let's move in now and talk about some of the things that have led us to think about how coaching worked in Australia. I should just say a few more things about my company, Growth Coaching International. Anna shared some things, but we've seen phenomenal interest in the whole coaching area in Australia, and it's been really satisfying work to be involved in. Last year we had over 9,000 Australian teachers and school leaders in various activities that we ran. And we provided about 5,000 hours of one-to-one coaching for school leaders and teachers. So it's been a widely embraced practice in Australian schools in the last 5-7 years. So we'll share some stories about that later. We host a big national conference that we hold in the Melbourne Cricket Ground, which is sort of our equivalent to San Diego de Bonbao in Madrid. But we don't fill the stadium. We held it in a particular facility there. But it gets a good response. So lots of interesting things happening. In fact, if you've got nothing to do in May this year, come on down and join us. We'd love to see you there. So we do quite a lot of work across the whole of the country, in every system, in every state, and now in New Zealand, in the Middle East, in the UK and Spain. And so there's some exciting things happening with the way the work is is progressing. We hope there will be some useful things for you to take away from it. Okay, a question here. Is a school like this, with the metaphor that's suggested by the clockwork machinery, or is it more like this, battling the rapids in a kayak? Or there's kind of no right answer here. Who would go for the former? It's pretty much like a machine. It runs fairly smoothly with predictable outcomes, and not too many takers on that one. Who thinks it's more like the second, with the rapids and struggling to deal with different kinds of pressures? Okay, it's probably a little bit of both, but it does seem to us that more the second metaphor is how we might see things emerging these days, and that schools are they're not rapid, turbulent places, but there is a lot of change. Political change, technology change, environmental change, government policy change, budget change, that all curriculum change. So it seems to have an impact on how our work evolves. So in that context, there's some interesting things emerging that seem to say that in complex, adaptive human systems, which I think schools are, there's an increasing emphasis on the role of dialogue and conversation as a way to make them work better. Basically, these human systems work by the way that people talk to each other. School leaders with their staff, teachers with teachers, teachers with students, teachers with parents and community members, teachers with government officials and administrators. And the whole organization works, we think, by the way conversations work. And it's that principle that we think has started to led to a real interest in the way that coaching has emerged in this last decade. We think it meets this need. It becomes a helpful way to organize and to lead and to grow the capacity in the schools. In fact, that's what we've started to see. So these people based in the UK would argue that it's the conversation is the basic unit of change. If we can change that, we change a whole lot of things around the way these organizations work. And if you're in a school leader role, my guess is that you would think of, spend more of your time in around a terminal. Much of it would be in one-to-one conversations with all of these people in this school community, different times, meetings with others, one-to-one, one-to-group, one-to-many. So how do we do that well? Well, we think coaching conversations are one of the ways that we can do that. And that's what sparked some interest in this area. So let's do some definition work. We are not talking about coaching in this context as a teaching, as a pedagogical approach, primarily, although some people have used it that way. We're talking about as a way to grow the adults, primarily in their effectiveness in the school community, but so that they have greater impact on their teaching practice and on student learning outcomes and well-being. This definition is from John Whitmore, a very early pioneer in coaching work. It's about unlocking potential to optimize performance. I would add well-being to that now too. And it's more about helping people learn than telling. So a little counterintuitive that way. Mentoring, which is one of the other learning by talking approaches like counseling or teaching, instructing, or I think or mentoring is one of the other ones there, it does imply a sense of an experienced person working with a novice to help them learn and grow by sharing of their knowledge and experience. That's great. Any of you who work in mentoring roles now, either formal or informal? No one? I suspect there are a few. Yeah, thank you. So that your experience is useful to help a less experienced person grow and develop. That's a helpful process. But the way we define coaching is there's less about that sharing experience and more about being fully present, asking questions to help invite discovery so that the person learns themselves and applies how they're going to meet their goals and move forward. So one of the differences we see between those two areas, and we think that's an important way to do that. So one way of defining the difference here is that we would think coaching is more about asking and how, and mentoring tends to be a little bit more about the telling and how. So there's that's a slight exaggeration and a little extreme way of defining the difference. But those sorts of processes we think go side by side, and we would argue that the best mentors actually use a coaching approach. They don't just stand there and tell their war stories about how it was for me, what happened, etc. Here's what you should do. They take a more questioning approach to that and apply their experience when that might be appropriate. Coaching is a less directive approach, and it sits at that end where we're helping the discovery happen through listening and questioning. And when that happens well, with a skilled coach working with a coachee, the magic can happen. Hopefully we'll get a chance to try that with you a little bit later into the session as we go forward. So if we're looking at, that's what we're talking about by the way that coaching works, and there might be some questions around that as we get through a little later, because we frequently have them in Australia, and I think the field has been confused somewhat by a lack of clarity around the way we've defined what we're doing. So that goes to what am I going to if I'm going to a professional learning workshop? Is it really coaching the way I thought? What about I'm reading if I'm reading research papers? Are they really talking about coaching or mentoring or whatever? They're all useful processes, but helpful to understand how they're similar, how they're different. That's one way we've started to define that. But once we saw that, we thought the conversation was a key part of how schools and other organizations for that matter, how they operate and how they can be more effective. And we saw that coaching conversations were a key way to help that happen. We started to explore a range of different contexts in the way schools are set up, where coaching, formal and informal coaching, could make a difference. So my background was an educator. I taught English and modern history, and then got into professional learning for educators. Left for a little while to work in the corporate area, got involved in executive coaching. One-to-one coaching that corporates pay a lot of money for. And that was interesting work. I got into it because I saw it as a way to help embed learning. Lots of professional learning workshops that I'd attended, and people would say nice things at the end, but to what extent were things happening differently 3 months, 4 months later? Do you know the experience I'm talking about? Hard to sometimes apply and implement the learning from these sorts of professional learning activities or others as well. Coaching was a way to help embed that by helping people set goals, helping really apply it to their context, helping really keep them accountable in their learning, and to really drill down into the areas that were useful for them. So we then started to see what are the various ways it could work in schools. We saw certainly in the top right-hand corner there the idea about working with leaders, either providing coaching for them or helping them learn how to be coaches was helpful. And certainly principals started to do that. I'll share some stories about how that's happened. But that was one conversational context, how leaders might work. More recently, in the last 5 years particularly, teachers talking with teachers about professional practice has been a key way in which coaching's been working in Australia and other places as well. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of Professor John Hattie. Some interesting things to follow through on his work about teaching practice and what makes a difference. But there's been a big focus in our country on encouraging teachers to observe each other, open up their classrooms, deprivatize the classroom, so that others could come and watch me teach, and I could work with them to help get better at my practice. And for a long time, that never did happen much. And Hattie's work helped to shift that focus. Let's start to look at what we're actually doing, how that's impacting on students, and how can we help each other get better. So once you've done some observation and collected some data on maybe someone doing it for you and you doing it for a colleague, and that's often how it's worked in a peer-based way, the coaching conversation happens after that. What would you like to work on? What's the area of your teaching practice that would be useful to explore and improve? This has all been taken out of formal performance management and purely offered as a growth and development opportunity. So we've seen that left-hand corner, the pink circle there, emerge in the last 5 years as a big area of coaching focus in Australia. And it's probably the biggest thing we do now. And you'll hear some stories about that a little bit later on. We also recognize that parents and community were part of this wider school community. So there are some ways that when we look at what coaching's about, it could be useful for the way we talk with parents. We would never call those formal coaching sessions, but the skills that make you an effective coach can be quite useful in various sorts of parent contexts or in other meetings with others that have an interest in the school life as well. And of course, the top left-hand circle is primarily the one we're always interested in. If none of what we're doing with the adults in the school community is impacting on student learning and well-being, then we've got it wrong somewhere. So we've started to see that there's interesting things happening around how coaching can apply to students, either external coaches working with students, teachers coaching students, usually senior students, around study skills or academic performance or career options and various things of that kind. And more recently, and quite excitingly, we've seen students trained to coach each other. And that's made an impact in certain schools where I've seen that happen. I was visiting a school in New Zealand about a year ago, and year 8, that's about 14-year-old girls, were coaching students a year younger than themselves. And there was just amazing things happening from that. Not only were there happening great things for the younger students in terms of a peer-based relationship, but those doing the coaching and had learned how to do it were showing all sorts of interesting, positive things happening for them as well. So we started to see all those things happening. We think that the way that conversations work in school, these are all contexts in which they happen. Coaching and coaching approaches make a difference in any number of those. Although primarily we're seeing it's still in the leadership and still in the peer area where we see most of it happening. Okay, now a little bit more detail on some of that. I've commented on a little bit of that already. Various sorts of things. In one system in Victoria, a southern state in Australia, where the tennis gets played. Some of you might have watched Rafael Nadal a few weeks ago. A fantastic tennis match. Did anyone see that? No, not so many tennis fans here. Okay, all right. That's Melbourne. Good system. A lot of people live in Melbourne, and a lot of big school system. They've provided a high level of one-to-one coaching for newly appointed principals. So if you are in your first or second year of working as a principal, you'll be provided with a coach for a certain number of hours to help you and support you as you transition into that role. That's one way it's happened. Then there's also training for leaders in terms of how to bring coaching skills into their particular leadership style and leadership approach. That's very widely a way we work in Australia. So all of those things can happen in that particular area. You'll see just in the bottom corner of the slide some references to some of the texts and papers that support thinking in these areas. If you want to chase those through, they're all on the reference list I mentioned. Here's a couple of examples. This Bastow Institute in Melbourne is one of the providers of this coaching, and there's a specific paper that just talks about that. Again, all of this able to be chased up later on. As I mentioned, this particular area and teaching practice has become probably the biggest area we work in now. And so instructional coaching, some of you might know Jim Knight's work from the United States, is a very specific way that it works with a special coach who doesn't teach, just works with the teachers in a coaching way. The way we tend to work more often is by training teachers who are still actively teaching to work with their peers. So, and various other professional conversations and learning conversations are some other names that have been used for that similar kind of approach in Australia. Again, some studies here. You'll see some comments from those schools a little bit later in a video clip, and some research there. The community stuff I mentioned, that's probably the least area that's been developed in our country. A little bit of research around on that, but not as much. Plenty more opportunity to look at that. And then the work with students, as I mentioned, has been in these sorts of ways. It's been played out. So we've seen this global framework. My colleague, Dr. Christian van Nieuwburg, co-author with Andrea of the book that you heard about earlier, who's a professor of coaching and positive psychology, University of East London. We developed a way of thinking about that just to help put some framework around the various ways we saw coaching being able to work in various different school conversational contexts. Okay, and again, there's some more studies that you can look up. All of this has got various levels of documentation. Okay. Down to another point I look to look at, that when we look at it working in these various contexts, principals, teachers, students, it can happen in a more formal way, where people might sit down together, schedule a meeting, write some goals in a formal way, have some continuity of meetings, so more than once, maybe a regular time that's happening once a week, once a month, usually not as frequently as once a week. And coaching can happen in that formal way. Or two teachers get together, agree they're going to work and observe each other, make some time to do that, or record it. The technology is used a lot to do that now. iPad's another technology that actually allows you to just film a little bit of your teaching and then to sit and talk about how it's working and use that as a way of gathering data. That's a more formal way. That's useful, that's helpful, takes a bit more time, but it actually can pay some substantial dividends. We also think, though, coaching can happen informally. Just walking side by side. A conversation that someone might knock on your office door, and I don't know whether you've ever had this happen. Have you got a minute? Just like to run something past you. Anyone ever had that happen to them? You got a minute, just like to run something past you? That's not a formal coaching situation, but we think in a short, maybe 5-7 minute interaction, you can use a number of the things that we would see as being coaching approaches in that particular time and make it a really useful conversation. So we see the whole range from, the student too, who might come and have a question in the playground. You wouldn't call that coaching, but the various sorts of things that you can use as you approach that and respond to that, and the questions you ask can bring a lot of the key elements of coaching. A focus on what's wanted. What would you like to see happen here? A focus on what's already working. What have you already done? Or what things might be skills or strengths you could use to apply to that? What options have you got for moving forward on this? Which one will you pick? What might be a next step? 4 or 5 questions like that. Coaching type questions, not analyzing the problem, helping get clear on where it's going, helping explore strengths, helping to develop some options and to make some commitment to action. Those kinds of components can be part of any conversation just about anywhere. When someone is looking to see something be different and is prepared to do something about it. So we would call those informal coaching moments, as opposed to sit down, maybe write some notes, and have a more extended conversation. That's helpful. So is this. And this is probably what you'll end up doing in terms of coaching more often than the former, I suspect. So I'd like to give you a little opportunity to experience what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to ask you to find that partner that you had your earlier conversation with. Can you just make sure you know who that is and get ready to have a chat? If you've got a pen with you, that could be useful here. All right, so just find your partner. If you want to stand in the corridor here, that's fine as well. But just will only take about 3 or 4 minutes, and find your partner, and then I'll explain how it works here. Okay. Okay, keen for you to have a go at this. So come with me on it, if you would. This is called sparkling moments. Okay. So one of you will be the first person to start, person A. One of you will be just asking the questions at that point. Okay? You'll both get a turn though. And I'll time this, it's not that long, because I believe we'll see some things emerge here about what the essence of coaching is about that is much better than me talking about it. So, okay, decide who is A, who's going to be thinking about this first. And this is about thinking back to a time at work in the last month or so when things were going really well. A time in your school, maybe it's in a particular class moment, maybe a resolution of a challenging issue with a student. You think about it. It's a sparkling moment. It's not a sparkling month. It doesn't need to go forever. It's just a short time. When there was something good happening for you, you were pleased about the outcome that emerged from that situation. Think back across the last month or two. I hope you don't have to go back several years, but identify one. I'm going to ask you some questions about that. Here are the questions. I think you can see them there. So tell me more about that. And you'll start to tell the story. What was it about that made that a sparkling moment, somewhere where some really good things were happening? And if you're doing the asking, you might record some things that emerge here. Just some points that listen, because I'll ask you to look at that data you collect. If you don't want to write it down, just try and remember as much as you can. Okay, is that clear? Yes. Great. I need you to come with me on this because I really like you to get into it. And so when your time is ready, I'd like you're both ready, I'll give you a sign after 2 minutes to swap. And you'll just reverse your roles, okay? I think it says 3 minutes. Let's just go for 2 here. Are you ready? Go. Time to switch around now. Swap your roles and just take another 2 minutes, except change your roles. Thank you. Keep going. Okay, you might want to put your headsets on again. By now, thank you for getting into that. You have heard 2 stories. You've heard one story and you've shared your own. And you've listened to some things that have been highlighted out of that particular experience, that positive experience. Here's what the next point asks you to do. Part 2. Reflect on what you've just heard from your partner. Take a moment to have a look at what you've got if you wrote some notes or recall what was shared. What I'd like you to identify is 2 strengths that you recognize were part of what this person brought to that experience. Maybe there were more. Let's see if you can just identify 2 strengths. Maybe it was perseverance. Maybe it was positive energy. Maybe it was the ability to listen well. Maybe it was a problem-solving approach. Whatever it might be. See if you can identify 2 strengths that you would recognize were probably part of what your partner brought to that positive experience. Then I want you to feed it back and have a go like this. Based on what you've just said, it seems that a strength for you might be. Okay? I don't know how this kind of works in your culture so much. In Australia, people don't find this very comfortable to do. But we're going to try it here as well and see what you think. So, based on what you've just said, it seems to me that maybe a strength for you might be, and put a name on it. Now, the point here is to try and get that to land. Okay, to land, to have an impact. Now, if it lands, it probably means you'll raise a smile. The person will smile at least a little. Although the person who gave me this exercise said when I do this in England, nobody smiles very much, a little bit. So when I do it in America, There's high fives and people weeping and all sorts of exaggerated things happen there. So when I do it in Japan, I get a polite bow. So he does work. I'm not sure what the response here is going to be. In Australia, it's kind of just a sort of a bit of a smile. But okay, if it lands, there'll be some kind of response. If it doesn't land, that's okay. You're just having a guess here. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me have another go and try something else to see if you can identify a strength here that's been part of this positive experience. That will just take a minute or two for both of you to do that. We won't interrupt you in the middle, but have a think about what you see there, and the first person who was doing the listening and the asking questions offers that feedback, sees what happens, and then you reverse the role. Does that make sense? Okay, go. 2 minutes all together. Go. Okay. Thank you very much. I hope you had the experience of one of those comments landing. Did anyone experience that, where you actually felt it and it felt okay? There's a couple of hands at least. Any more than that? Great. Okay, excellent. And let's try one more thing with this to finish this off, because this is where the coaching part comes in, if you like. Having sort of worked with someone that you've probably, even known before, there's something can happen here. So we want to take this to the final part, is these questions here. And again, we'll just do these relatively quickly. We can actually just ask, what would be a sign if there was more of this strength, if you were using this strength a bit more in your work each day? What would you be noticing? What would others be noticing? And then what might be one thing you could do to see more of that in play? Let me give you one example. My team gave me some feedback about the fact they like the fact that I do research and read different things and find different resources, and this is a real strength, they said, for you. You like to kind of get into the data and read things and explore things, and I think that's probably true. And but what they said was, how can we benefit from that? How can we get some more of that value from you liking to do that? And so I started to think about that. And then they asked me what might be, a sign or a step that I could take to use that strength a little bit more as well. And it came to a few things that were related to email, newsletters, and various things I was writing and other things. So that was a strength identified. How might it work more? What might be one thing I could do to take that further? That's the next bit, the last bit on this. Both have a go at that. I won't interrupt you in the middle. Again, about 2 minutes. See what you can do to take this further. Because the coaching part means identifying something and taking it into the future and committing to a small step action that's going to help you move in that direction. With your same partner, last conversation, go. Okay. If you can bring that to a close. In some ways, what you've just done over about 10 minutes is a simple form of a kind of coaching conversation. You've explored some strengths with a partner, maybe someone you didn't know. You've asked them to think about it in certain ways, and you've stretched them to think a little bit about how it might play out in the future and invited them to take a step towards that. In essence, those things are at the heart of what good coaching conversations are about. Helping people identify preferred futures, exploring resources that they already have, helping to elaborate some options and choosing some to pursue, and then inviting them to make an action commitment that means they make movement. Because coaching is all about moving from one place to another. The original word comes from a word in Hungarian about coach, from which we get the coach, or a car-like vehicle, and help people move. And so the movement thing is important, and I just have to ask you to reflect on how that worked without even knowing that person you might have been working there, what might have emerged from that short interaction. And that's what we would call some form of informal coaching. And I mean, there are other ways that you can use a coaching framework, which is the one that we explore, the growth model, which has some components in it that just tease out those various things that you've been exploring with your colleague. What is it you want to achieve? What's already happening? What are the options? What would you choose? When will you do this? And how might you sustain progress or movement towards this? And we use this as a key part of our coaching approach that we teach and help others to explore. And you'll see at the top, it emphasizes the importance of the relationship, the need to make sure there's high levels of trust and rapport that will make a difference, and the benefit of celebrating the results, which you just did a little bit of in the affirmations that you were sharing there. So that growth model underpins a lot of our work in both formal and informal coaching kind of conversations. Leaders with staff, teachers with teachers, teachers with students are on that whole spectrum of potential conversations where coaching can make an impact. So as we get towards the end here, just a couple of minutes of a short clip here of, we pressed a button here, that's, okay, there we go. Where we have just a handful of teachers talking about the difference that coaching has made in their particular schools. This is subtitled, so you that are just speaking English, but see what you think of this. 2-minute clips.
Schools have implemented it in so many different ways. It's given them a focus, it's given them real clarity about where they want to go and how they want to move ahead. And it's helped them sustain that long haul that's necessary when you're implementing projects.
That coaching allows leaders to lead rather than direct, I guess, a particular direction. It allows teachers to really reframe and rethink about their practice for most impact. And from the student's point of view, it allows them to actually see themselves as their own teachers and to be in charge of their learning.
It's focused attention on collegiality, and I think the main one is the idea that teachers working together in a professional learning sense and in teams can be very powerful. We naturally do that as part of our model, but using the coaching, we are now linking that to our strategic plan, and it's fitting very closely in with the new performance development framework that the Department of Education has implemented this year.
Exciting part of the impact has been on our middle leadership team and our executive, where we're far more accountable to meeting our goals and our strategic intents.
Student engagement, learning outcomes and so on. But it's been a wonderfully safe place for teachers to come and to have someone in a really private, confidential space hear their stories and to help them feel re-energised.
All of our operational planning and the layers that drill down to even learning area plans at the college level all use the growth model, particularly around the use of tactics.
For some of them, ranging from 5 years in the game to 35 years in the game, they've never sat down like this with a coach, with someone to help them really deeply engage with where they're at, both on a personal and a professional level, where they're going, how that fits with the school and their leadership role. So it's just fantastic.
So just some short stories there, and we could replicate those many times over. In fact, you'll see some of them in some books that are emerging, and you can track some of those down on our website too. I mean, that will all be in English. But we just have been excited and really deeply satisfied by the way that schools and teachers have applied the coaching principles in all of those different contexts that we talked about earlier. Most of those folks were talking about the pink area in terms of professional practice and how working with teachers working with each other has been such a satisfying thing. For many years, that was not what happened in Australia. Classrooms are very isolated. people were very protective about what happened in my room, and that's changed significantly in the last few years. And we think the level of trust and rapport that's developed as teachers started to explore their own professional learning through a very positive, non-judgmental approach has started to have that kind of impact. And now the challenge is to not only just hear anecdotal stories, but to start to really back that up by more empirical research that really says where it works, what kind of it works, what difference it makes for students. And fortunately, we are seeing teachers get involved in doctoral programs to explore that. And there's been a rush of that happening, and we'll be happy to share those papers as they emerge. So my challenge to you as we just finished this overview of how we see the coaching approach being a dynamic way of changing the way we lead and the way we talk in schools, and we've seen those sort of things emerge. Where might this make sense for you? What particular context might be useful to explore? There's no set pathway. It's all different. Your context is different from the person perhaps who sits next to you, and certainly it's different from what we might have seen in Australia. So we don't share this as any kind of prescription. We just discovered some things that have worked and that teachers have embraced. We're excited by the difference it's making. And so far, the response we've had in the a little bit of work we've done in Spain has been amazingly encouraging as well. It might just have something that could work here. So when we come down to it, I think there's, when we're talking about building a coaching approach, there's really a couple of key questions that are part of it. And if you take nothing else from tonight, you might just think about how these questions could work in your everyday conversations. They're fundamentally essential coaching questions. What would you like to be different? Someone comes to you to explore an issue, they're often very clear about what they don't want. Asking them what they want instead is sometimes quite confronting and difficult to answer. What is it that you want here? And the more specific it can help them be on that, the better. What's already working? Let's direct people to some of those resources, some of those strengths you've just been talking about that might already play, and let's build on those and see how we might use them in the course of where they want to go. And there's always a question about next step. What might be the thing you can do on this in the next 48 hours? Because these challenges, while they remain big, are hard to move on. When we detail our preferred future around them in specifics, they become more manageable. When we take a first step on moving towards them, we start a ball rolling that actually can be unstoppable at times. And it's that initial step and momentum that's important. What's wanted, what's working, what's next? Great coaching questions that hopefully you can build into your conversations from tonight, if you're not already doing that. Okay, just as we finish now, and a few things just to wrap up with. I would like to say that you don't need to be perfect at coaching. You don't need to do lots and lots of training. You don't need to develop high levels of skill, but some is helpful. But you can do things just by taking some simple steps and making some movement. So just come with me on this little exercise here. I'd like you to add up these numbers that appear on the screen. We start with 1,000, and then there's some other numbers that come with it, and I'd like you to call out loud the total as we add them up, okay? So we start with, I don't know what the Spanish word is for 1,000, but I'm sure you'll get it right. Okay, we start with 1,000. Okay, that's good, but a little more volume on that would be good too. So now we have, good, yes. And now we have, okay, now we have, and now, and we're adding them up, and now we have, I got no idea what you're saying, so I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but the right answer is not 5,000. Okay. If you came to 5,000, here's a big test. I've never done this in Spanish before, but every time I've done it in English, most people say the answer is 5,000. It worked like that here? Okay. The answer is 4,100. Now, there's something happens here that makes us carry over when we shouldn't. A small thing that we overlook visually. Did anyone get 4,100? There might be a special prize for that person. Hey, okay, I got a little prize for you. I have a koala bear here, a little Australian bear. Okay, if you want to come and see me at the end, I'll give that to you. Most of us got 5,000, and it's the wrong answer. The point I would simply make is it's just a small error, a small thing that causes us to get the answer wrong. And my challenge would be that sometimes just a small thing can make a big difference. So if you're thinking about some of this stuff that we've talked about tonight, it might have some interest in how it could play out in your context. Just take one small step in a direction towards that and see what happens. Sometimes that can be more significant than you think. So it only just remains for me to wrap up here and some questions. I'm happy to kind of communicate with you on LinkedIn or Twitter if you'd like to do that, and direct message or just follow. Love to talk with you in that way. And it's just been a real privilege to be in your country. I'm a guest here, and we've been welcomed in a wonderful way with generosity and warmth. I really appreciate the way that's happened, and I hope there's a chance maybe to do that again. So thank you very much for being with us tonight, and all the best as you think about this in the future a little more. Okay.
Muchísimas gracias a todos y buenas noches.